You're listening to Healthy Aging on Dr. Radio, Sirius XM 81.
Welcome back to the Healthy Aging Show. This is Dr. Michael Perskin, and we just had a really interesting hour on addiction. But now we're going to talk about other problems in the world, and I'm very pleased to have on Malya Levin, who is an attorney for the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Center for Elder Abuse Prevention, which is located at the Hebrew Home in Riverdale. Malya, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And for our listeners, you might wonder, why are we having a lawyer on a doctor show? One thing is I really like lawyers. I like them as patients and people and friends because they have pretty clear thinking. And unfortunately, elder abuse can be a legal problem. And it's really one of these things in society that we just haven't really grappled with too well.
Yes, it's just emerging now as a problem that's as rampant as it is, and the federal and state government and the legislature are just beginning to recognize that it's something that our profession needs to grapple with. Yeah,
and from my point of view as a doc, so and just having some fun and knowledge of the world. So, used to be, this was a kind of small town family handling situation. So some of the issue is if everyone has 4 or 5 kids, usually 1 or 2 of them kind of help out with the parents as they get older, if they make it. So we have this perfect storm of like millions of people, 11,000 a day getting older. Right, at age 65. We have the fastest growing population segment is 85, and now we have a cohort of older people who don't have 5 or 6 kids. They might have 2 kids, and they cannot be around, or only one's around, and that one is a problem. So I thought maybe you could talk about it from your point of view. How common is this problem? What are some of the things that people ought to know?
Sure. I mean, elder abuse, I think the first...
What is elder abuse?
Sure. Yes. Took the words right out of my mouth. I think the first thing people need to know is what we're talking about when we speak about elder abuse. They commonly say that the term elder abuse is kind of where domestic violence was about 30, 40 years ago. So people are just really beginning to know the term and know what it means. But it can really mean a variety of things. It can be physical abuse, which is, I think, what's most traditionally thought of. But it could just as easily be emotional or psychological abuse. It can be sexual abuse. And it can be financial exploitation or abuse, which is, they say the most common form of elder abuse. Actually, MetLife in 2011 commissioned a national study and found that $2.9 billion is taken from older adults every year in this country as a result of abuse. So it's really a staggeringly rampant problem.
And that's just like the real criminal fraud, not the more subtle take advantage stuff.
Yeah, I mean, their study was based on newspaper reporting, so that's only what makes it to the news, what's sensational enough and, as you say, really sort of juicy enough to get on the news, not what you were alluding to before, which is the more subtle issue of, children falling away and people being left without a safety net and some of the, more subtle vulnerabilities of people taking advantage that are around them.
Right. No, and even, as an example, one of the things when we talk about people with dementing illnesses or cognitive impairment, the magazine subscriptions. I recently had a case where the wife came to me and, it was clear the husband's been getting some cognitive issues. Actually has a history of a psychiatric disorder, too, which very successful guy, was quite well controlled most of his life. But as he got to his late 80s, he's one of these guys who you send him something in the mail, he'll sign up for it. Mm-hmm. So fortunately they can afford it, but he's spending like thousands of dollars a month on magazines.
Right.
So that's not going to make the papers. There's no crime involved. It's just but someone's taking advantage of it.
You'll forgive me. I'm going to quote a medical study, but we've learned that actually there was a study out of the University of Iowa that the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that we know degenerates with age, also makes people more likely to believe false advertising and make actual purchases of products that have been misleadingly advertised. So we're learning that there's actual physical reasons.
Well, hopefully that won't get out, because my understanding from my friends in advertising is that in the media and stuff, everyone only cares about the 18 to 35-year-old demographic. That's the only one.
The hidden gems there.
Yeah, no, but it makes sense, right? So that I would agree, because my older patients often do. They come in with little clippings from magazines or things they wrote down that they saw on television that are just patently ridiculous.
Right, and I think the point, and also, professional con artists know intuitively what science and the law are sort of just catching up with now, and they prey on that.
Right. Well, so that sort of works.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of works. So people are definitely gullible, and that's really really bad.
Right, and then the increasing isolation, which you mentioned, of children falling away or becoming less dependable, social circles, scattering, and people are isolated, and that makes them both more vulnerable to abuse because there's no one sort of checking in and keeping an eye out, and also it perpetuates abuse because no one's around to nip, sensitive, difficult situations in the bud.
And these things are typically slippery slope. So and sadly, often the abuser is actually someone known to the older person.
Yes, that same MetLife study found that 34% of those cases of abuse, of financial abuse specifically, were family and friends, people known to the abuser. So these are people who ostensibly, were trusted and sort of let in and then took advantage of that.
Yeah, so that's pretty bad. But typically, who is doing the abusing? So that was only 34% financial. But maybe you could talk a little bit about what the Weinberg Center, what your mission is, and what you guys have found over who the typical abuser is, because I imagine you guys are dealing more with physical abuse.
Sure. Well, yeah, we operate an emergency shelter, so we take in cases where it's really come to the point where somebody's no longer safe in their home because of abuse or imminent risk of abuse. And we really like to say, we don't profile people. We've found that over the course of our work and all the victims we've dealt with, this is the type of problem that really knows no race, knows no socioeconomic background. Here in New York, we think about Brooke Astor. That was a pretty well-known elder abuse case where this was a woman who, has buildings named after her and her family, and you would think if anyone were insulated from the effects of abuse, it would be her. But, she was victimized by her son, actually. And so, and we see everyone from somebody like that to somebody who's, living on a fixed income, and from all walks of life. So it's really something that people really prey on the universal effects of aging.
Right. So if folks are listening here, Malya, what would they look for? What will be some of the signs that their loved one is a victim of abuse?
Right. Well, I think, when you talk about, like I said, there are many different forms, but certainly, with regard to physical abuse, any sorts of bruises that are unexplained or any kind of physical injury that can't be easily explained or understood. I would say, generally, a lot of noting the signs has to do with being able to observe people over time and note a change in their behavior and their affect. So people who were formerly lively and, went out a lot are suddenly withdrawn. They're staying at home. They're isolated. They suddenly are showing emotional distress, crying, depression. They're suddenly, there's a decline. Maybe they seem more confused or agitated. And one of the reasons why elder abuse is so often goes unreported or unnoticed is that so many of the signs of abuse can be mistaken for what people dismiss as signs of aging. And therefore just sort of, shrug it off in that way. So I think it's really important to check in with older people in your life regularly and note a sudden change, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, a sudden confusion about finances or a change in banking patterns. That can really often be, actually a sign that someone's being victimized. Right.
So, it's an odd kind of mirror image problem from my point of view as a practicing physician who has a specialty interest in geriatrics. So what happens is, it is not normal for people to have cognitive issues as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
However, it is extremely common.
Mm-hmm.
So on the sort of family and concerned friend side, you have, Bob is getting older, so of course he has some problems with his memory and functioning, so I'm going to help him out. And if they're, helping them, then that's great. And we, those people are unbelievable, and we talk a lot about caregiving. On the person side, though, there's very little planning for this. So, even though about 40 to 50% of people by age 85 have dementia, right?
Right.
There's, people who are 80 aren't saying, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to have a good chance of being demented in 5 years. So what should I do? They don't seem to do that. So they think they're going to be the exception, which is sort of a typical optimistic view. And it turns out being optimistic is a good sign, actually, to live longer, interestingly enough. But there's no planning. So I see this as a failure to plan to this stage of life. A lot of the stuff I talk about on this show is all about that.
Right.
So, it's interesting that people then are confronted with a crisis. And it's good that you guys are helping. Well, Malya, what I'm going to do now is invite our listeners to call in here on the Healthy Aging Show.
Great.
It's Dr. Michael Perskin. I'm speaking with Malya Levin, who's an attorney at the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Center for Elder Abuse Prevention, located at the Hebrew Home here in Riverdale, in the Bronx, New York. If you have a concern about an older person in your life who you think may be being abused or a story to share, please give us a call here on the Healthy Aging Show, Sirius XM 81, by calling 877-NYU-DOCS. That's 877-698-3627. So, Malya, for our listeners, what would you advise people to do to help prevent abuse for their relatives, for their parents, and things like that? How should people safeguard against this?
Sure.
Kind of thing?
Well, I think, first of all, what I said before, which is really checking in with the older people in your life regularly is really key. So much, as I said, knowing what is suspicious and what is a red flag really has to do with being able to observe somebody over time very often. And as you also said, it's a slippery slope. And so being able to catch something at the beginning of the slope before things have gotten to the point where, somebody needs to come to us because they're really no longer safe and they need to be uprooted really can come down to that regular checking in and knowing what's a symptom of someone's medical condition and what is not. So definitely advise that. And as you said, advanced planning. I mean, actually, the New York State Power of Attorney law was significantly revised in 2010 directly as a result of noting this staggering rise in elder abuse, and some safeguards were put in place to make, appointing a power of attorney a safer, less vulnerable position.
Right, because that's the ultimate, right? You get someone to sign over the power of attorney and you can empty their bank account, right?
Right. Well, this is the problem is that, so often people need, like you said, people need to plan in advance in order to make sure that if they are cognitively impaired, they're not still signing checks to God knows who. But then at the same time, they need to appoint somebody else who can theoretically be signing checks to God knows who. So they need to find someone who they trust, and then they need to put safeguards in place. And the law actually allows for appointing a third-party monitor to be able to monitor that power of attorney, allows for limiting the amount of gifts that a power of attorney can give to third parties. So the law is trying to allow people to plan while still, maintaining some control.
Right. So I think that's sort of one of the things that I've heard before, Malya, is, when you set this up as a family, it's nice to have a little check and balance. Because, everyone has good intentions, but sometimes things are troubling. So meaning that if someone has two kids, they should organize it so that, one kid has control over something, but there's a little bit of checking in on both ends.
Sure. And, also it's hard for people sometimes to take honest stock of their family and people who they may love, but really aren't in a position to be able to control their finances and make financial decisions on their behalf.
Well, there's also resistance on the part of the older person because they, of course, have, like you said, their judgment's a little off. And then they don't have insight into that. Well, Malya, let's go to the phones. We're going to speak to Kim. She's calling from Pennsylvania. Kim, thanks for calling, and welcome to the Healthy Aging Show.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Kim?
Good. Doing good.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So my comment was, we recently went through this with my mother, who's in her early 80s, and after my father passed, her power of attorney was changed to one of her daughters who she didn't have the best relationship with. And so a little bit of what you were talking about with the child falling away, plus she lived the farthest away. And so ultimately what ended up happening was, unfortunately, my mom, very nice person, trusting, similar to what you were speaking about. And so somebody would call and say, oh, you need this insurance policy, or, oh, you need this mechanical policy on your furnace, or, oh, you need another extended car warranty, on your 10-year-old vehicle. And so ultimately what ended up happening was, unfortunately, she's incurred either through credit card debt or actual losses in paying these bills over $100,000.
Wow.
In just probably about 2 or 3 years' time. Now, what happened was then ultimately, then she ended up taking a mortgage out when the house was paid for before, when my father passed. And so now she ended up going to personal care, but, of course, her choices in personal care were affected by her now finances.
Sure.
So fortunately, she had a long-term care insurance policy that my father had purchased, and she couldn't cash that out. But she had cashed out life insurances, annuity plans, things like that. So she is in that realm where you were speaking about. This doesn't make the papers, but certainly she was taken advantage of, and there were a lot of factors that contributed to her losses that now, there's nothing, I've done everything that I can, and so now, unfortunately, her last year, she has to live someplace that's, far away from her only child living in the state, because of this.
Right. So, Kim, I really appreciate you sharing this story with our listeners because, it's sort of it can happen to you type of thing. So thank you. And Molly, you have comments?
Sure. I mean, I think that, unfortunately, it's not an unfamiliar story to me. I think around the holidays, we particularly see an uptake in this type of thing, phone calls with either charity scams or offering to sell things. And again, this is preying on that, cognitive deterioration and brain neurological deterioration, but also on the natural desire of an older person for companionship and for financial security. And so very commonly there are these investment scams where it's sort of, oh, I've got the perfect plan that will protect you for the rest of your life. And who wouldn't want to believe that? And when you're already vulnerable, it's so easy to. And unfortunately, it's very hard because when somebody's in that gray area of capacity, it's really hard to, take away control from them of their own finances, even though in some sense, you may want to for their own good.
All right. Well, Kim, thank you so much for calling. And next we'll speak to Mary Ellen. She's calling from South Carolina. Mary Ellen, welcome to the Healthy Aging Show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking my call. I really had some comments about a situation my family went through. My father is 86 and has dementia, just normal forgetfulness. My mother is 82 with Parkinson's, and she has Parkinson's dementia. So I was power of attorney for my dad, and I really didn't understand the laws in South Carolina. I didn't realize my father could change that anytime he wanted to.
Right.
So I had a sister who took him to an attorney and influenced both he and my mother to give her power of attorney. And then they started going from independent living to living with her to my mother in a nursing home, my dad being left alone all day long. There was probably in a year $30,000 that went down the tube. And we ended up as siblings having to go to court and have them declared incapacitated so that we could protect my parents. And I just don't think people even think about looking at, as their parents are aging, what are the laws in my state or my parents' state, and what can I prepare for ahead of time to ensure that I care for my parents?
Yeah, well, Marion, that's another sad story. But again, I'm so happy that you shared it, and I'd like to hear Malya's comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think so often you alluded to, seeking a guardian through the courts, and that's a very, as you know, having gone through it, an onerous, expensive and lengthy process that power of attorneys in part are supposed to, evade. But at the same time, and attorneys, I think about that because as an attorney myself, I think about that attorney who has an elderly person brought into their office by a younger child or grandchild, and maybe the child or the grandchild is directing the representation, and the older adult seems to go along with it, but they're not being so vocal about it, and it's really incumbent upon the professional to sort of step in and question what's going on, take the older adult aside, speak to them by themselves, but sadly often that's just not done because attorneys don't have that training, and so very often, damage can be done even when there is a plan in place.
Yeah, I think in this case, the attorney, my dad had done power of attorney only 6 months before. So I really think the attorney should have questioned it, and all of that, of course, is spilt milk because if we had changed it back, she could have just got it changed again. So it just was not. And I think there's a lot of that going on, and people don't know it. They don't know. I mean, my parents weren't beaten, but they were verbally abused. My sister would tell them that we had all deserted them, that, she was isolating them. And they didn't understand any of that.
Well, and Marianne, what was your sister's motivation to do that, you think?
She felt like she was not getting along with the other siblings, and she believed that she could care for our parents better than we could, and that in the end we would just lay down and say, oh, thank you for being the savior.
I see. So it wasn't completely out of malice, but she mismanaged things from your point of view.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, I don't think she was trying to steal from them. I think she let my dad do whatever he wanted to. I think she just had no controls, and she herself was unfortunately not mature enough to understand you cannot leave an 86-year-old man with dementia by himself all day long. And plus, my parents were separated. They'd been married for 60 years, and they were all of a sudden separated and had no clue why. So it was just a very sad situation.
Well, man, I'm sorry your family went through that, but thanks for sharing your story, and thank you for calling. Next, we're going to take another call from South Carolina from Janice. Janice, welcome to the Healthy Aging Show.
Hello. Your show is so fantastic. It's one of those God things. I'm driving in the car and I'm thinking, oh, this is exactly the help I need.
All right. Well, thank you.
My mother lives in New York, and my sister lives in New York, and I live in South Carolina, but we both are on the power of attorney. Mm-hmm. My sister for the last 10 years has been helping my mom pay her bills, so she's been with a joint account. Unfortunately, I found out from the neighbors that my mother got sick, and she was left in the hospital, and unfortunately, hospitals don't help elderly to eat, and I understand they're busy, so my mother was failing very quickly, and I went up, and my sister had removed and taken out all the money out of my mother's account, withdrew and cashed in CDs up to $100,000. And now I found out that she's also taking her Social Security, and she put all that money, including the Social Security check, into her private checking and savings account. My sister has done this. So, of course, we were all surprised. And my mother, having dementia now, just looks at it, she told social service, I did get social service involved for adult protection, and, my mother explained to social service, well, it's okay that my sister has all this money because she needs to pay my bills, and that's my mother's understanding.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just looking at this, I'm taking care of my mother now, and my sister has all the finances, and the bank didn't stop it because she was on the account.
Right.
So where does one go from here?
Yeah, Janice, sorry, that's an awful story. Malya, any advice?
I mean, it's very hard in terms of recouping that money because, as you know, being a joint account holder means that you're both equally entitled to the full amount in a joint account. You're equal owners of the money regardless of where it came from. I don't know the specifics of this particular situation enough to be able to give a legal opinion about the particulars, but I would say generally, this is why joint accounts are really advised against, and a power of attorney situation is really preferable, just because, and I know this doesn't speak to your situation now, but just, as advice going forward to other listeners, power of attorney situation is really preferable because the power of attorney is specifically beholden to use the person's assets for their best interest, whereas in a joint account, it's just all the money belongs to both people. So, I think what is important going forward is to make sure that your mother's assets, whatever remains, is safe and that she's safe going forward. That's really what's most important, to be honest, as opposed to maybe focusing too much on what's gone on in the past.
Yeah.
How do we get those assets back? We both had the power of attorney.
Well, Janice, I guess you might try to find an elder lawyer in New York State and see, where obviously we can't go into the specifics here, and Malya is not going to do that. But my advice, if you told me this in my office, would be to find an elder attorney.
Yes, I agree. Someone who can evaluate the specifics of the case and figure out, because certainly, in theory, a case could be made depending on, where all the money came from in the account and all the records. A lawyer could certainly advise you about that.
So, Janice,
thank you very much.
Good luck, and thank you for your call. And next from Missouri, we're going to have David on the phone. David, how are you doing?
Hello?
Hello, David. How are you?
Good. Yourself?
Great.
Well, I've actually, since we're talking about abuse, I was actually accused of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I submitted the unsafe driver form on my mother, who happens to be 79 years old. She's got vision in one eye.
Right.
The other eye in 89 via an accident.
Right.
So anyway, she's been driving all this time. I was amazed she got her license to begin with, but been driving all this time. Last year she had 3 wrecks. This year she has had 4 already, and I just got to the point, that's enough. She was hiding everything. She sits on a little bit of money so she could pay for it out of pocket.
Right.
The only way I would find out is if I go over and her car was missing. I said, "Where's your car?" "Oh, it's in the shop. I had a little fender bender, and the little fender bender ended up being $3,000.
Right.
Those type of things. So she told me recently that she was going to move, and I said, "Why are you going to move?" And she said, "Well, because I'm being abused." "So who's abusing you?" "You are, because I'm the one that filled the form out, and having her retested basically is what it comes down to for driving."
Right, that's pretty much what happened.
To pass. She's already failed the written twice. She's got a little bit of dementia going on, early stages.
Right. So she's mad at you, David.
Oh, totally.
But did she voice that complaint to the authorities, or what happened?
Well, no, just to me, basically, and to my brother and sister. Now, my brother and sister are another story. I'm the youngest. My sister is about a year and a half older, and she's basically disabled on permanent disability because she's overweight and can't get out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
My brother is about 10 years older and has lost some of the vision in his eyes because of neuropathy. So he lost his license, so they were kind of semi-dependent on my mother for money and even errands sometimes. So they didn't want to do anything. So it's a tough decision. It was the hardest decision I ever made to do that. And people need to really think about it hard. Because it just kind of tears the whole family up,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, one thing I can tell you is that when people are, under stress, they say all sorts of things they don't mean, and particularly if they have some dementia going on. And I think you sort of made a judgment as to, the greater good.
Right.
She could have been driving your brother and sister around. They could have all died in a car crash.
Right. Well, that's what I kept telling her. I said, "You're either going to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else." She said, well, she didn't care if she killed herself in an accident. It was her business. I said, well, what if you took out another family, Mom? I said, that's where I draw the line. I said, I can't, in my conscience, continue to let you drive. I said, as simple as that. But, I know I did the right thing. It's just, it's going to take a while to heal the family back up. And
yeah, well, I think you got to have a long-term view. And David, on the specifics, I'll ask Malya to comment on the following. So Malya, so here at face value, and David seems like a good guy, and he tried to do the right thing, and then he gets accused. So how does that work?
Well, I mean, just because somebody uses the word abuse, it doesn't mean that abuse has occurred. And I think it's important. I think a common theme in a few of these calls is that pre-existing family dynamics that were present before anybody became an elder usually have an impact on whatever's going on, and then they're just exacerbated by cognitive impairment and physical disability and all the vulnerabilities that come with getting older. But I think specifically in this case, we get. I know we have a 24-hour hotline, for example, and we get calls of all sorts, and some of them are very serious calls, and that's why we have the hotline, and some of them are calls from people who are frustrated by family feuds and squabbles, and maybe need someone to listen to. But a professional will be able to discern between those two categories fairly quickly.
Yeah, David, so I'm sorry you sort of took it from the chin, but I think you made a decision. You got to just stick with it. And thanks so much for your call. Thanks for your call. And Malya, thank you so much for coming on. This is really interesting and important topic that I think you're right, because of the demographics, we're going to hear a lot more about this.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and thank you for coming on. And for our listeners, we are going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to talk about the fact that seniors not only are living longer, but their lust for life and love is becoming more acceptable in various places. So we're going to talk with Robin Dessel, who's a social worker and is a sexual expression educator at the Hebrew Home at Riverdale. So if you're interested in that, stay with us here on the Healthy Aging.